The RTX 5090 still stands tall as the king of gaming graphics cards, but of course, it doesn't come cheap. However, what if you wanted to buy one that's a lot more expensive, even more powerful, and more extreme in every way? Well, that's what the ASUS ROG ASTRAL LC RTX 5090 represents. Of course, we've already tested the 5090 Founders Edition and the ASUS ASTRAL air-cooled version, along with other variants from a variety of brands, so we won't be recovering old ground on the capabilities of the GPU core. However, we are going to find out if this insane liquid cooling version offers much, if any, real benefit over more traditional RTX 5090 solutions. With its hybrid cooling, it features a large fan on the GPU itself with a full coverage copper plate for the GPU core, and most notably, pre-installed tubing that runs to a 360mm rad, fitted with a trio of premium quality ASUS RGB fans. There's an attention to detail here too, with a phase change GPU thermal pad and a protective PCB coating to combat any moisture and debris issues. All small details, but they add up when trying to unlock maximum performance from what was already a very powerful graphics card. As we all know, cooler temperatures on a graphics card can allow the card to run higher clock speeds and maintain its boost clocks for longer without overheating and, of course, throttling. And this also gives more room to pump more raw power into the card, which ASUS have done with a suite of 80 amp MOSFETs for improved overclocking headroom. So what I'm trying to say is, on paper, this should be a strong performer. But as I said, it's also considerably more expensive, and we'll get into the price once we've seen how its performance holds up to the competition. But before we get into that, here's a quick word from this video's sponsor.
Alright, stay calm. You've got one job. Do not let this thing overheat.
It's running hot. How do I know if it's safe?
Get the WireView Pro.
The WireView Pro safeguards your graphics card with real-time power and temperature monitoring, acoustic alarms for custom thresholds, and sensor pin detection to ensure proper 12V PWR connection. External sensors can monitor additional components like memory or voltage regulators, while an OLED display provides instant insights, meaning that this is the last time you'll blow a 12V PWR connector, soldier. To keep your system protected, click the link in the description below.
So right out of the box, the ASUS ROG ASTRAL LC RTX 5090, bit of a mouthful, is obviously an impressive bit of hardware. It just gives you the instant impression that it's going to be pretty incredible. There's a level of quality here that we've come to expect from ASUS, with a great attention to detail, clean lines, smooth edges, and just a premium fit and finish from front to, I guess, back. The whole package, I'll be honest, is massive. There's no getting away from that. But it should be pretty easy to accommodate in most mid-tower PC cases that can fit a reasonably sized GPU and a 360mm radiator. I mean, the card itself is actually quite small, coming in at 284mm long, 238mm tall, and 48mm wide, making it just over 2 slots thick, though it does have a dual slot I/O, making it somewhat comparable to a Founders Edition model. Though this is not taking into account, of course, the tubing and the radiator, of which the tubing does make the card a little wider, but that is kind of expected. Now, one welcome benefit of the wider design is that it allows a large fan on the card itself. While the GPU is liquid cooled, having a fan on the PCB does have its own benefits to prevent hotspots and to cool the MOSFETs, cables, and of course other components. Weight-wise, I'll be honest, the card comes in at 3,950 grams, including the radiator, which is heavy. While the card alone is still, I guess, relatively heavy, but not in the grand scheme of things, at 2,170 grams, making it, I guess, on the heavy side, but still not out of the realms of what we've seen on air coolers. Due to this, they do actually include a stand to help prop up the card, but considering its premium nature, it just comes across feeling a little bit cheap. Though in all honesty, I think you could get away because it's not very long with not actually really using it at all. Now, the main part of the card that you'd see if mounting it vertically would be the front. And this is, in all honesty, an extremely clean design with a mix of colours and materials that lends to the overall clean design of the card, which in comparison to any air-cooled model, it's actually more, well, it's very enclosed in nature, though follows the same design principles of other liquid-cooled models that we've seen in the past, not just from ASUS, but from other brands too. Tucked into the top of the card near the 16-pin power connector is a BIOS switch and 2 PWM fan headers as well. This is actually a common feature on high-end ASUS cards, allowing you to hook up 2 fans from your PC case so that the card can control these fans when it gets warm and effectively request more airflow independent of what the rest of your system and fans are doing. There's also a light bar that spans the length of the card, only broken up by the tubing that feeds into the top. These tubes themselves are quite thick, which means it feels durable and reliable, but it's flexible enough to ease the installation of the card into your PC case. There's good quality sleeving on it too, and interestingly, there are no exposed fan or RGB cables for the radiator, as they're all actually integrated in, again giving it just that nice clean look overall. On the rear, well, there's not really a huge amount to talk about. It's very enclosed and also quite industrial looking, with just some simple Astral branding and a glimpse of the rear of the GPU core. This is likely designed like this due to the cooling side of things, because liquid cooling technology works differently to an air-cooled card, and in a way you kind of don't actually want heat escaping into areas that make it harder to cool, and instead the heat is transferred through the liquid that passes down the tubes. As you follow along the tube, well, this is where you find a, I guess, fairly traditional 360mm long radiator, similar to the kind that you see with many AIO CPU coolers, but it does come in a little bit thicker at 38mm and with a higher fin density than usual as well. ASUS themselves say that the surface area has been increased by 50% compared to their previous generation of liquid cooler cards, potentially giving higher heat dissipation, which in turn allows the fans to operate at a slower speed, which of course then means less noise. So as long as you can accommodate a card of a similar size to the Founders Edition and a slightly thicker 360mm radiator, you should actually be good to go, though I'd always advise checking dimensions based on your setup before adding it to your shopping cart. Again, as long as your case is mid-tower or above and can take a 360mm rad, things should actually be fine, because although it is larger as a complete package, the actual GPU itself makes it one of the smaller RTX 5090 cards on the market, when not factoring in the radiator element of it. The integration of the RGB light bar is welcome, but it doesn't stop there, as beyond the card itself, we also have RGB built into those ROG axial fans, which are daisy-chained for power and lighting, which gives you plenty of color customization that can be controlled from traditional RGB headers and also via the ASUS Armoury Crate software. I feel that they've not really gone too over the top here, as of course you can just turn off any dancing light shows, but it still means that the main part of the card just has that simple light bar that I guess is not too in your face. And I'm actually glad that they've gone for that and not any RGB on the single fan that sits on the kind of main shroud of the card. I think that might just be a bit distracting. Now, in terms of the rear I/O, it's pretty standard, offering up both the latest HDMI and DisplayPort standards, so all modern display technologies are supported as they are on any other RTX 5090. And of course, it will easily handle multiple displays too. There's 3 DisplayPort connectors in total and also 2 HDMI ports, so it gives you full flexibility over your connectivity options. Tearing the card apart proved to be actually fairly easy, but did feel particularly stressful since this may be the most expensive card I've ever dismantled. 6 screws on the back hold down the backplate, as well as a good portion of the PCB that can be separated from the rest of the shroud with 3 extra screws. Once the PCB was free, we needed to unscrew and separate the cold plate from the core in order to pull the PCB away and leave us with the individual components. If you want to separate the liquid-cooled elements, then it's just 4 more screws holding down a clamp that keeps the tubes in place. So now that we have the card torn down, we can see kind of how much is actually serving a function here. Starting with the backplate, we find it to be fully metal with plenty of thermal pads that help to keep the components on the back of the PCB cool. Speaking of keeping things cool, the front of the shroud also features a metal design, again with thermal pads for keeping the VRM cools. And in all honesty, I don't know, I just feel like I would have expected something more, but I'm no engineer, so I can only assume that ASUS know what they're doing here. Now, not everything is made out of metal, as mentioned earlier, as the front of the card features a pretty large kind of panel of plastic that serves more for styling, but doesn't have any major function beyond that. Moving on to the cooler itself, we find a pretty standard industrial-looking pump and block that features a copper base plate and plenty of thermal pads to keep the core and the memory ICs cool. There's also no markings or indications as to who makes the pump, and this could either be an off-the-shelf solution or something specifically designed and made for this card. Now, the PCB is quite large compared to other cards on the market, measuring in at 260mm long, and its size mainly comes down to be able to cope with the increase in clock speeds and power delivery, as this actually features a 24-phase VRM setup for the GPU, with monolithic MPS MP86670 Dr. MOS phases with 80 amp power ratings, and is controlled by a Monolithic Power Systems MP29816 controller. For the VRAM, it goes even further. There's a 7-phase setup with the same MP86670 Dr. MOS phases, again rated at 80 amps each, though this time we find a monolithic MP2898 controller instead. The memory comes from 16 GDDR7 Samsung ICs with K4 VAF 325ZC-SC28 markings and are rated at 28 gigabits per second. Then at the centre is the GB202-300A1 core, which is fabricated using TSMC's NVIDIA 4M process, as found on all RTX 5090 cards. Now, the Founders Edition 5090 comes with a clock speed of 2117 MHz and a boost speed of up to 2407. However, this card is boosted quite a bit in comparison, with a default boost clock of 2580 MHz, but also has support through an OC mode, taking it up to 2610 MHz. The trade-off comes down to the card running hotter, and that will likely run its fans a little bit harder to maintain that mode, but at least you have choices about how you want to run the card. Now, the boost clock is 7% higher than a Founders Edition in gaming mode and 8% higher in OC mode, and hopefully that will be seen in the real-world performance metrics, which we'll be looking at a little bit later on. Now, obviously not being content with those overclocks, we did want to see if there was any more that we could squeeze out of the card to push our clock speeds even further on both the GPU core and the memory. Now, overclocking this card proved to be fairly easy, and with the cooling potential, we were actually able to push things relatively far, with an additional 280 MHz added onto our core clock and our boost clock, with our memory also seeing the maximum increase of 375 MHz, or 3000 MHz effective speed. Something a little interesting here is that we weren't actually able to push the power any higher. Not that we needed it to push the card anyway, and we found all the changes to be consistent between both quiet mode and performance mode. Now, with all this incredible cooling hardware, such as the copper block, the large fan on the PCB, and the liquid-cooled radiator, we're actually eager to test the cooling potential of this card to see how it actually fares in a more realistic scenario. So with that, we ran an hour-long F1 run at 4K on max settings to simulate a real-world gaming session. It's here where our performance at stock in quiet mode stacks up fairly well, with both the GPU and the memory temperatures averaging in the low 60-degree region. Now, there is very little to worry about in terms of overheating, and when it comes to the fan noise, it was actually almost silent, with our fan speed sitting around a very respectable 1030 RPM throughout the test. Power-wise, I'll be honest, it was pretty hungry, pulling about 570 watts during the run, so it's fair to say that the cooler is more than effective at doing its job here. Now, when we apply our overclock, we do see temperatures increasing, but only by an average of 1 degree, placing the temperatures around 61 degrees throughout the test on both the GPU and our memory. As a result of our minor increase in temperatures, we do see a minor increase in fan speeds, with the fans now sitting at an average of 1050 RPM, which is still significantly less than we do typically see on air-cooled cards. Now, in terms of power draw, we do see another slight increase, if that was, at all possible, with it now averaging at roughly 590 watts of power draw, with occasional increases sitting at just over 600 watts. Then, when we take a look at how performance mode stacks up, we find that it lives up to its name, with a higher fan speed of 1500 RPM, allowing for higher clocks, and even running at a slightly cooler temperature, averaging around the high 50s, just bordering but never actually reaching 60 degrees. More performance does come at a cost though, and aside from the extra noise you get from faster fans, we also see higher power draw. Again, with the average sitting just below 600 watts, which is more power draw than we saw from overclock in the quiet mode. When we overclock performance mode, we do see things increasing further, with this being the highest that we've seen our clock speed, with it managing to reach over 3000 MHz at points. Fan speeds and temperatures didn't really change a whole lot since overclocking, with the same averages as we saw pre-overclock. But we do see, again, higher power draw on average, with that now sitting over 600 watts for most of the test, only dipping down in less stressful scenes or, of course, when loading the game. Now, of course, we had to run some games to see how its performance stacks up against some other 5090s. And it's here in a Plague Tale where we see the Astral LC in quiet mode sitting with an average FPS that matches that of the Founders Edition, but with a 4% lower frame rate in the lows. This result is interesting to say the least, as it places us below the air-cooled version of the same card, though performance mode does see a small increase in the FPS with just over 1% more frames than we saw in quiet mode, but with the same low figure. Overclocking does seem to work wonders here though, as it results in performance that tops our chart, seeing a nearly 8% improvement in the averages over stock in quiet mode. Performance in the lows also increases here, averaging roughly around the same as the other cards. But interestingly though, overclocking performance mode actually resulted in a lower average frame rate, sitting 4% higher than stock, but 3 FPS behind the overclock of quiet mode. As we move over to Black Myth Wukong, we find the card still just below the air-cooled version of the same card, albeit only by a single FPS in the averages for quiet mode and only 2 frames behind for performance mode, which we can put down to margin of error. Now, when we compare it to some other cards, we see that relative performance has improved in this title, as we're now taking advantage of the fact that this card is pre-overclocked, and we now see 5% more performance than the FE in quiet mode and 2% higher in performance mode. In terms of manual overclocks, we do see some improvements, with the LC now sitting at the top of the chart, with quiet mode sitting with 3% more performance than the Aorus Master Ice, and a 6% improvement over itself, and with a 7% improvement in the lows. Performance mode doesn't fare quite as well though, as the overclock does see us increase in performance by 4% over stock, but when compared to other cards, we don't see much of an improvement, with an average that matches the Aorus but comes in with single frame less in the lows. Lastly, moving over to Cyberpunk, where the stock performance of the LC in performance mode is again sitting quite low down in relation to the other 5090s, seeing only 2% better performance than the Founders Edition, and coming in with a single FPS lower than the MSI Supreme. The lows are slightly different in terms of the story here, because even with the Supreme coming in with 1 FPS more in the averages, it does fall behind the LC in the lows by quite some margin. And when we look at performance here, the LC is the smoother experience, even if only by a little. Looking at quiet mode is a different story yet again, as we start with a higher base performance level than we saw from performance mode, with 2% more to be precise. Obviously, we still need to look at our manual overclock, and when we take that into consideration, it's surprising to see it not topping our chart, instead being outperformed by the Aorus Master Ice that sat 4% better performing than our overclock card when it was in quiet mode. But performance mode, on the other hand, was such an increase that it actually looks wrong. But after retesting, I can confirm that it is correct, and we end up with a 12% increase over the stock performance. Now, comparing how this card performs to some of its RTX 5090 siblings, we find that, without too much surprise, the ROG Astral LC is actually the coolest of all cards on both the GPU core and the memory, with the overclock only barely increasing our max temperature in quiet mode, with performance mode sitting slightly cooler with no change from overclocking. Of course, when we compare the other cards, there is, well, no contest. With temperature differences this big, it really just puts the other cards to shame. But in all fairness to those other cards, they are all running cheaper air coolers instead of a huge liquid cooler. So it's understandable not to say that they are cheap, of course, they are still 5090s, but compared to the LC at least, this certainly looks like a decent deal. So, summing things up, the LC 5090 is obviously very extreme, and one of the most insane, powerful, and overbuilt RTX 5090s you can actually buy on the market today. And, well, that's saying something, as it's not like the base model 5090 graphics cards are, let's say, lacking in performance metrics. With a massive liquid cooler attached to it, it's not the most practical, don't get me wrong, or compact setup on the market, but at the same time, it's also a lot easier to deal with compared to a custom water block and liquid cooling configuration. There's also something to be said about the aesthetics, as it's one of the most outlandish graphics cards on the market, and putting one of these into your system is a bold statement. That being said, it's not uncommon for the deep-pocketed PC building enthusiasts to favour ASUS for this reason, and it would complement other ASUS hardware designs very nicely, in my opinion, with their power supplies and motherboards offering similar extreme gaming aesthetics and RGB implementations, and just all of that rolled into one. Of course, the design is great, but it's all largely functional stuff too. I mean, the cooling is taken very seriously and has allowed for, I guess, some pretty robust power delivery improvements, meaning that the boost clocks can be pushed harder and for longer, ensuring that you get that exceptional gaming experience. In our tests, the LC 5090 came in with strong performance. I mean, it's a pre-overclocked card, which I guess offers noticeable advantages over the Founders Edition. And then with manual overclocking, we saw even more impressive gains. And while the card's power limit couldn't be pushed higher, its core and memory speeds were easily boosted thanks to the more extreme cooling solution and that already high power level. This outstanding performance, I guess, really does come down to its superior cooling. That hybrid kind of liquid cooler kept both the GPU core and the memory cool, with average temperatures at what I would class as exceptional levels, even after extended periods of higher gaming load. This efficiency did mean other things as well, like the fans could run at low RPMs, which of course then keeps the noise to, I guess, an almost silent level. And it just makes that cooling so effective that it maintains these low temperatures and quiet operation, even when it is manually overclocked, which I guess in comparison does give you that clear benefit over traditional air-cooled cards. Then there's the inclusion of a 24-phase VRM for the GPU and 7-phase for the VRAM. And those monolithic Dr. Moss 80 amp power stages, well, that means that the card can reliably handle those high loads for extended periods. And, well, that's where your money's going, I want to say. This is essential given the base power of this chipset, but even more so with the big overclocks that it provides. And that's what this kind of gives us. So we've come to the final boss of graphics cards, the price. I mean, the 5090 isn't exactly regarded as affordable, with the Founders Edition starting at, well, $1 under $2,000. But good luck finding one in stock. Typically, something like an ASUS Tough Gaming will actually set you back about $2,800, while more extreme cards like the ROG ASTRAL air-cooled, well, that comes in at $3,300. However, once you add on this big cooler and more extreme hardware, $4,287. So the big question, I guess, comes down to, is it worth it? Well, I'm never going to recommend even the base model 5090, as they are way outside your typical consumer requirements and price range. However, if you want to invest in something truly extreme and you have deep enough pockets, it's hardly going to disappoint you. But it is going to be a hard sell for me to tell you that spending that amount of money on a GPU is truly worth it. Ultimately, this is a big fanciful toy for the wealthy enthusiast who just wants something more extreme because it's bigger and it has more bragging power. It's not how I would spend my money, as while there are gains there, the price increase to achieve them is just too hard to justify. However, if I unwrapped one on my birthday, I wouldn't be exchanging it for anything else in a hurry. I just wouldn't be paying for it myself. So there you have it. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, a like and a sub to the channel would be amazing. And if you love what we do, we've got a Patreon where you can support what we do, while also getting access to some really cool extras, including behind the scenes content, a super special area on our Discord, exclusive live streams, and much, much more. The link is, as always, down below. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one. See you later, guys. Bye-bye.